Hey, good morning, everyone. How you doing? Happy BC long weekend. As Peter mentioned in the welcome, I can't believe it's August already. In some ways I can, I guess, but in other ways it just seems like we're on the downswing. If you're a golfer, you know what that means. But anyway, thanks for tuning in this morning. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Remember to send those pictures in of wherever you're taking the service in with whoever you're taking it in with or whatever you're watching it on. It just helps us stay connected even though we're disconnected, not being able to meet together. Do you remember these? They were all the rage in the early 90s. They're called auto stereograms. I had no idea until this week as I was doing research on this message. They don't look like a whole lot when you first glance at them. But here's the thing, if you just hold them in front of your face and then just stare at them and kind of allow your eyes to just kind of go blurry, all of a sudden a 3D picture will appear. So here's an example. You guys can try this one at home. I did it on my screen. It worked, so you can try it. Now some people can't do it, but here's a picture. So get close to your screen and just start staring at it. And let your eyes kind of just go. You know, it might take you a couple of seconds, but slowly an image is going to appear. And if you're able to do it, what you're going to see is a shark in 3D. You know, like auto stereograms, there was another image that made its rounds on the internet. It's this one here. It's really popular in its day. Again, it doesn't look like much. Kind of looks like some ink blots that you might see in a psychiatrist's office or something. But here, you got to do this one. Stare at the 4 dots in the center of that picture. And just stare at them for like 15, 20 seconds. And then after the 15 or 20 seconds, look away to a blank wall or a piece of paper and watch what appears. So just give it a shot. I'm just going to kind of count out 15 seconds in my head. 5, 10, 15. Now look away, and you'll probably see a circle kind of floating around, and your eyes will be trying to catch up to it. You may see 2 heart shapes. Just keep staring, focusing in on that image, and what will happen is a face will appear. And it's the face of Jesus. Well, the stereotypical face of Jesus, right? Because none of us were walking around when Jesus was here, so we don't really know what he looked like, but we all have an image in our mind of what he would have looked like. You know, for example, if you were asked by a forensic artist to describe what Jesus looks like so he could do a composite sketch, it would probably go something like this. Oh, he was about 6 feet tall, 185 centimeters. He was slender, well-toned. He weighed around 190 pounds, 85 kilograms. I remember he had these warm brown eyes that just drew you in. And long, silky, sandy blonde hair that was never put in a man bun, by the way. And he had a well-trimmed beard and mustache that framed this welcoming smile, complete with bright white teeth that were further accentuated by his tanned complexion. Sound familiar? And so after a few moments, the artist takes the drawing and turns around and says, "Does this look like the guy you're describing?" And you're like, "Yeah, that's him," right? And I get it. I'm with you. When I look at pictures, that's a picture I have in mind of what Jesus would have looked like. But get this. In 2002, a bunch of British scientists, along with some Israeli archaeologists, got together, and using forensic science, they put together what they believe is the most accurate picture of what Jesus would have looked like. And here's the picture. I think it's safe to say that's a far cry from what most of us picture Jesus looking like. For me, I always picture Jesus as, part Rambo, You know, in that he's rough and he's tough, but he's also part Mr. Rogers. Weird combo, I know, but he's gentle and he's meek, mild-mannered. He taught some important lessons and said some really nice things that are deemed nice enough that they're worthy of being posted on Facebook or Instagram to encourage or inspire us or others. You know, words like, "For God so loved the world," "Do not worry," "Do not be afraid," "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." Those are all inspiring, touching, and encouraging statements, to be sure. But have you ever seen a t-shirt or a notepad or a coffee mug or an Instagram post with these words? "Why are you such cowards? Don't you have any faith at all?" I mean, not only did Jesus utter those words, he said them to his closest friends. And if that's not enough, he said it to them during a time when they were actually fearing for their very lives. You know, it's interesting how there are certain things that Jesus said that we would rather just skip over because they don't really fit our image of what he's like. And so we just pass over them or ignore them completely because it could trash the whole Jesus was a nice guy image. And that's what we're going to be looking at for the next few weeks here. We're going to be exploring that whole theme. And I didn't really come up with the idea. I stumbled across it. I was reading a blog of a pastor that I follow, and at the bottom of his thing was an ad for a book called "Jesus Was Not a Nice Guy." So I was like, well, that's interesting. So I clicked on it, bought this little e-book. And so we're jumping off, kind of loosely off of that book, but that's what we're going to be exploring these next few weeks, and I'm really glad that you're here with us to do that. But getting back to those words, you know, "Why are you such cowards? Don't you have any faith at all?" Those words that Jesus uttered are found in a story. It was an event that happened, and it's recorded in actually 3 of the first 4 books of the New Testament, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which outline and follow the life of Jesus when he was here on earth. And for today, I'm gonna focus on the story as it's recorded in the book named after the guy that wrote it, a guy named Mark. And this story takes place after Jesus had finished a long day of teaching. He had just finished teaching about one of his more popular, what is now one of his most popular parables, the one with the casting of the seed, and some landed on the rocky soil, and some landed in the good soil. And he was preaching from a boat because there's so many people, the crowds were so large. He was on the Sea of Galilee, which is a lake located in Israel. It's about 6 miles long, 7 miles wide. And as the crowd was dispersing that day, Jesus turned to his closest followers and he said this, he says, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." And so they took Jesus in the boat and started out. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat and began to fill it with water. And I love this next part. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat, and I love the detail here, with his head on a cushion. You know, it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible because I've kind of lived that. I've told this story before, but it happened to me. If you're not familiar with it, I used to be a commercial fisherman for 27 years. That was my job. And one day I found myself in the middle of one of those unexpected summer storms that the West Coast is famous for. The day started out, we got up in the morning, it was brilliant blue skies, there wasn't a breath of wind. The seas are probably the calmest I've ever seen them at the north end of the island. It was a perfect day for traveling, which is what we had to do that day because the area we were fishing was closed. So next opening was around the top of Vancouver Island over in Port Hardy. Problem was, our truck was in Tofino, the port that we actually left from when we went on this trip. And so we needed to get our truck up to Port Hardy. And so the deckhand and I were kind of like, well, do you want to take the truck? Well, I don't want to take the truck. You take the truck. You get the truck. So finally we flipped a coin. I lost. And I ended up having to travel with another boat down to Tofino to get the truck. And the boat I was traveling on was quite small compared to the one I was used to working on. The boat I was traveling on was like 26 feet, pretty small. It was going to be tight quarters, but I knew the crew. Well, I didn't know the captain that well, but I knew the two deckhands. Tofino was like 10 hours away by boat. Weather was beautiful. And so what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, a couple hours into the trip, the skipper announces to us, he says, I'm going to catch some shut-eye. I'm going to bed. So off he went. One of the crew members hopped behind the wheel, and away we went. Short time later, maybe an hour or so, we found ourselves in the middle of one of those famous West Coast summer storms. It just came up out of nowhere. And in mere minutes, we went from flat calm seas to mountainous seas. And up to this point in my career as a fisherman, I had been in some pretty nasty weather, but this was right up there. This was intense. And there was wave after wave crashing on the back deck, filling it with water. And I remember at one point that I was looking at the crewmen are looking at me, and we're thinking, our faces said exactly what we were thinking. It's like, we're in trouble. This is not a good situation. And I, along with the rest of the crew, thought, why isn't the skipper waking up? Like, you think he'd be awake trying to get us out of here. What's his problem? But there he was, sleeping away, just like Snow White. It was an ugly Snow White, but nonetheless, that's what he was sleeping like. And so just like the disciples, we woke him up shouting, Teacher, is it nothing to you that we're going to drown? Well, okay, I'll be honest. That actually isn't what we said. We didn't call him teacher. We called him a lot of things. Teacher wasn't one of them, and I'll just leave it up to your imagination to come up with your own descriptors there. But suffice it to say, we finally succeeded of waking him from his whatever dream he was having, and we invited him into the nightmare that we were living. And we looked at him, we said, dude, what's your problem? It's like, how can you sleep in the middle of this? The boat was tossing and turning all over the place. Like some captain you are. Get us out of here. You know what? He did. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't freaked out. He'd been working on the ocean since he was like 5 years old. He'd been in situations like this before. He just simply got up, assessed the situation, hopped behind the wheel, and navigated us home safely. And I remember at one point him saying to us, what are you guys all freaked out about? This is nothing. We're going to be fine. It's just pretty much what Jesus said once he was awake. Awake now, he told the wind to pipe down and said to the sea, quiet, settle down. The wind ran out of breath and the sea became as smooth as glass. I wish our skipper could have done that, but he couldn't. But that's what happens here. And it was at that point in the story that Jesus, get this, reprimanded the disciples and said those words that we're looking at. Why are you such cowards? Don't you have any faith at all? I don't know, but in light of what they just went through or what they were living through, don't you think those words seem a tad harsh, kind of on the mean side? Like I say, I can relate to this story because I kind of lived it in a way. But you know what? I would bet the same is true for you. Yeah, sure, maybe you haven't been in an actual storm with a sleeping captain, but you've been in a storm nonetheless. Maybe you're watching this morning and you are in a storm right now. Maybe it's a physical storm, a relational storm, a financial storm. And it's bigger and more powerful than anything you could ever begin to hope to manage. So whatever you're facing today, whatever you faced in your past, because maybe you've been through your storm, you're familiar with the feelings that come with it. Anger, confusion, hopelessness. But most of all, when you're in a storm, we feel afraid and we feel alone. Maybe for you, when you were in your storm, you prayed and asked God to help you. But you got up the next day and it was the same thing. Nothing had changed. And it's as though Jesus or God was asleep, unaware or unconcerned with what you're going through. And if that describes you, or where you've been or where you are, just remember the words that open the beginning of this story. It says, late that day, he, referring to Jesus, said to them, let's go across to the other side. And they took him in the boat as he was. Did you catch that? It says, they took him. They took Jesus in the boat, which means he was in the storm with them. What a great picture of what is actually true about the proximity of Jesus when we're in a storm. Jesus is with us in the doctor's office. Jesus is with us, comforting us in our grief when we mourn the loss of a loved one. Jesus is with us in our financial struggle. He's with us in our challenging family relationships or our struggles with people at work or in school. But here's something to think about. What if, as remarkable as this miracle of calming the wind and the waves is, and about Jesus being in the middle of the storm, what if that isn't the main point of this story? I mean, could it be, and again, I'm just throwing this out for you to consider. You can kind of roll it around and mull it over. But could it be that Jesus was revealing to those terrified seasoned fishermen and us today who he really is? Because if you read the story, it seems his disciples hadn't caught on yet, even though they had been around him every day. And after the wind and the waves calmed down, we read this. It says, they were in absolute awe, staggered. You know, like what just happened? And then they asked this question, who is this anyway? Who is this? It's a great question. And it seems to reveal that this miracle is about more than calming a storm, as good as that is. You know, back in those days, a common belief was that lakes and oceans and bodies of water were more than just bodies of water. To the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, which these men were, water represented chaos and disorder. And these men were familiar with the creation story, which we find in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. Would have been in their Bible that they had at the time, the Torah. And they would have been aware of when God's Spirit hovered over the waters and brought chaos into order. And they believed that stilling storms was something only God was able to do. But yet, Jesus was there, seemingly just a man with some really good teaching, issuing commands that even the wind and the sea obeyed. You know, even though the disciples had walked with Jesus for years, had front row seats to his teaching and the miracles that he performed, they didn't really grasp who Jesus was. God in the flesh. And so in a moment of utter humanness, because Jesus was fully God and fully human at the same time, Jesus loses his cool. And he comes across as not a nice guy when he says, "Why are you such cowards? don't you have any faith at all? You see, Jesus did not come to this earth to walk the dusty roads of the Middle East as a human to be nicey nice. He came to reveal to all of humanity, you and me, that we don't have to do life alone. It's a vastly different reality than the one that most of us allow ourselves to live in every day. The propensity to think getting through life and the hardships in life is up to us. We talked about that in our last series when we talked about God only helps those who help themselves. And Jesus came to dispel all that. You know, sometimes I've needed some strong words to kind of get me to see something that I was having problems seeing. You know what? At the time, that can feel really uncomfortable, and it can feel mean. Like, how dare you say something like that to me? But you know what? It's actually in that discomfort that I find that I experience a breakthrough. And although that whole kind of dynamic doesn't fit into our common sense, our common use of the word nice, it's actually better than nice. It's the best gift you and I could ever receive. It can be better than nice because it is loving. This story is a reminder that Jesus is no ordinary man. And if we're willing to accept him in all his humanity, all his divinity, he offers us not the absence of trouble. I wish it were that way, but it's not. Sometimes it is, but most times it's not. So he doesn't promise us the absence of trouble, but he promises us his presence in the midst of trouble. We just have to believe that. That's faith, which we define around here as having confidence that Jesus is who he says he is. God, that he is good, and that he can be trusted. This story is a reminder that in the storms of life, we are never alone. You know, from the beginning of creation, God's character has always been the same. And the thread that weaves its way through the biblical narrative is that God saw us humans struggling. And so he devised a plan to come and rescue us. And he does it in the most bizarre, unimaginable way. He becomes one of us. That's the Christmas story. And he comes to us in the person of Jesus. Simple carpenter, born through a miraculous virgin birth in a barn in Bethlehem. And because of that, because of God taking on our humanness, he knows and can identify with our struggles, with our hurts, with our fears, with our doubts, and with our confusion. I mean, just think about this for a minute. God came to us to meet us, to walk with us, to identify with us, and reveal to us through his son Jesus who he is and what he is like. What's he like? He's kind. He's compassionate. He's caring. He's trustworthy. He's faithful. He's understanding. And he's loving. He's a nice guy. And yeah, sometimes not a nice guy. But you know what? That's good news. It's good news because when the storms of life come barreling in, and they will, and you're left feeling confused, disillusioned, and doubting, remember that even when you don't feel it, Jesus is right there with you. And you can trust that, hope in that, rest in that, because he is God, and no storm is too big for him to ride out with you. Really glad I get to journey with you as we learn to trust God more and more, one step at a time. I invite you to pray with me. God, sometimes we read things in the Bible that just seem so out of character. And oftentimes, the reason that is we read them out of context. We don't see them in the bigger story. And that's what's true about these words. They can sound so harsh, especially when you're saying to the people that said, we want to follow you. We want to go where you go. But it can be so hard to really get our beliefs in our head about who you are into our heart. And so I just pray for all of us that we would come along that journey together. We would link arms, that we could learn to trust you, have confidence that you are who you say you are, that it's the biggest, the best redemption story ever, and we get to be a part of that. We thank you for loving us, and we pray this in your name. Amen.